Hi, this is Lynn Twyman with Courage Network. Thanks for being with us. We often see domestic violence from the perspective of victims and survivors, but rarely do we hear about judges speaking about the issue. I have with us Judge Lynn Toler. Many of you know her as the daytime courtroom drama judge of divorce court, but many of you don't know that she has also worked with domestic violence and to also make changes in her own community regarding the issue. Judge Lynn, I'm so thankful to have you with us today.
It's good to be here.
Can you tell us about your work before divorce court and how you became one of television's judges that we have all grown to love?
Certainly. Back in 1994, I was elected judge. I was 34 years old, and I was a municipal judge in Cleveland Heights. We saw approximately 300 to 400 domestic abuse cases a year that came to court as actual cases. And what I found there was that the judicial response to domestic violence was so limited, and it didn't take care of so much of the breadth of the problem. They would come in, and by the time everybody was in there, the court was the problem and no longer the abuser, and the women were more supportive of them than they were of their own needs because we offered so little. We could punish him, but we didn't give her any tools. So I joined a couple of things. One was the Templum House as a batterer's intervention place. And what I did with them was I structured sentencing plans with them so they would be more compliant with getting into batterers programs. And then I also started a group of young girls because once a woman is in an abusive relationship, it's very, very difficult to get out for a multitude of reasons, be they economic, emotional, just sheer fear, because the guy says, if you leave, I will kill you. And often that's one of the most dangerous times for women. So I thought the best thing that I can do, other than shore up the court a little bit, is to go out and deal with 14 and 15-year-old girls. And the first question I would always ask is, how many of you in here intend to grow up and be in an abusive relationship? But of course, nobody would raise their hand. And I said, well, according to statistics, a third of you will. So what I'm going to try to do is to address the disconnect between what you know now and what you see in a person who is abusive or potentially abusive, so you can steer clear or at least recognize it sooner. And the last thing that I did was we had a countywide initiative for a coordinated response to domestic violence. Again, remember I was talking about court is such one small piece, so I got my community, Cleveland Heights, with social workers, police, me, probation officers, the domestic violence people, all of us sat down at a table and said, okay, woman X comes in, this is her problem. How do we respond, and how do we make sure that every agency within the context of Cleveland Heights would respond appropriately and connect with one another? So those are the kinds of things that I was doing when I was back being a real judge.
Judge Lynn, you have tried thousands of domestic violence cases in court. What is one of the toughest DV cases that you have tried that sticks out in your mind?
One of the toughest ones was one where he never hit her. And his type of domestic violence was just creating an air of intimidation that was just overwhelming. And he had a room that he had a phone in. She couldn't go in that room. And he dictated everything she did, everywhere she went. And one day he finally threw something at her, and she ducked, and she came into court. Well, this is one of two cases. She came into court, and she was exhausted. I mean, just beaten up to the point of having no confidence in herself. And I remember putting him in a domestic violence program, police to take him to her house, picked up his stuff, and he left, had an order against him, and we were going to put him in a domestic violence program. We weren't going to put him in jail because he had never hit her, but we wanted her to get away from him. And we also found if you put him in jail for 3 months, they come out and think, she's the problem, not me. So you have to do jail and the domestic violence program together. So I put him in jail for a while, got him out, put him in the domestic violence program. He had a no-contact order. The day he got out, he went to her house, sat on her front porch with a cup of coffee, and waited for her to come home. And he didn't do anything. He just wanted her to know that I couldn't, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That he couldn't be stopped. And for that cup of coffee, cost him 6 months. That's the most I could give him. I said, you should not have gone to her house. You did it to intimidate her. The response is 6 months in jail. And when I tell you no contact, that's what I mean. I've seen him in domestic violence programs after that because I visit some that I attend, that I send them to just to see what's going on. And he was very sinister. And in the way he did things and what he was doing. The second most compelling one was one where this woman, she was so fragile by the time she got to me. Her mother had called, and her husband had her by the back of the neck and was showing her the dirt on the floor that she missed underneath the dining room table. And she hit her head on the dining room table, and her mother said, look, it's domestic abuse, you ought to call. She did, and he actually went to trial, and his response to me was, if you just understand the circumstances, Judge, it was her fault she hit her head. Had she submitted to my taking her head and showing her the dirt on the floor, she wouldn't have hit her head. It was the fact that she was resisting what I was doing that caused the injury, and not me. And he pled not guilty on that basis. We went to trial on that, and he honestly believed that. She sat out in the hall afterwards. He got convicted, of course. And she was sitting between a mother and an aunt or two people, and she was fragile like paper. He had her believing you could just see through her. He had her so worn away and whittled away. And I went out and talked to her and told her, because testifying for her was a nightmare. You just wanted to jump up and hug her.
Right.
And it was extraordinary. And I told her how brave she was. And she had two people that were very supportive. So I felt somewhat comforted that she would be all right. But those were the two most alarming cases that I saw, simply because the psychological damage was so intense.
And you mentioned a good point there, which is the psychological aspect. That by itself, I would imagine, for a judge, makes it difficult to assess some of the cases. And what I mean by that is, like in the first case, you said that there was no physical abuse involved.
Right.
And so I know that is a part of the frustration for a lot of victims and survivors and people that are advocating for this issue, is when a person comes to court and they're saying these things are happening, but they have no physical proof.
Right.
How do they get the help? How do they
right.
get the support? How do they get the judge or the jury to believe them? So.
Right. Yeah. A lot of states have statutes like we did. I remember the number. It's 2919.25C, which was a threat to do immediate harm was sufficient. It only had carried a 30-day sentence with him, but most women didn't know that the simple threat of imminent violence connected with the ability to impose that violence was a violation of the law. It was a fourth-degree misdemeanor, to be sure, but it was a misdemeanor, and I don't think a lot of people appreciated that. And also the difficulty becomes in the judiciary, despite my knowledge and concern about women, I had to also make sure that I was an independent adjudicator. Do you know what I mean? I can't prejudge a case. I have to have the evidence before me, which requires a lot of the police departments and prosecutors to do their job well. Because even if I have this vague sense that something's wrong, absent proof beyond a reasonable doubt, I have no choice. So all aspects of the judicial system, starting with the police officers and going through the prosecution, have to be well trained in order to properly present a case, when you often have a victim who, by the time they get to court, no longer wishes to testify.
Absolutely. Judge Lynn, there are many parents who are concerned about protecting their children in court from abusive spouses. What resources are available, and how can the parents who are protecting the kids properly prepare themselves for court?
The problem that you have when you're dealing with something like that is everything is so different depending on where you are. Some cities and some prosecutors and some police department and communities have strong support systems for those in domestic violence, and that's always my first response is plug into what is there. The parent can't do what the child hasn't done or won't do is find out how to navigate the system, find out what's available, what domestic violence centers they have, what shelters they have, what social workers they have, and make sure that those resources, because they're not always easy to find. So that's something they can positively do and have the numbers and the place all available for them. If you are talking about going to court, the great way to prepare for that is, one, always remind them, you've got my support no matter what you do. I'm here for you, and I'm behind you. Have the other information available for the support that they get from the community at large. Be there with them. A friendly face in the gallery is helpful. Remind them that the truth is on their side. You know what I mean? This is your opportunity to speak. And if you want to look at me, look at them in the courtroom all day long and do that. And have that eye contact and say, I'll be there. You can stare right at me the whole time you're testifying, so you feel stronger and more capable and more able.
That's great advice. Thank you, Judge Lynn.
Oh, thank you.
Do you believe false claims to get back at spouses hurts the ability of court systems to be effective?
Absolutely. And I've had several cases in my courtroom where I really got angry at women who were making false claims, and it became obvious. You always want to err on the side of caution. When a woman came to me and said, I got a restraining order, I need a restraining order, you always erred on the side of caution. You listen to both sides, but if you're not quite sure, you err on the side of caution. But there was one woman, sometimes you can just, the facts just don't bear it out. And the worst one I ever had was a woman who wanted to get the house. And they know that we will put an abuser out of his house. In my state, that's what we could do even before there was a trial, just immediate removal. What she did was she went to the door, and she banged on the door, and he opened the door, and she kind of fell backwards. The police knew about it or something too soon, and I couldn't figure it out. And finally, we realized that her daughter, who was a grown young lady, like 19 or 20, was standing outside the police station waiting for her mother to fall down. I mean, they were setting the guy up. And, I just wanted to, I know when she goes over there, there's usually problems. So I went to the police station while she was over there. I mean, which it just didn't make any sense. And I got very angry because I said, those who misuse the system put doubts in people's minds. It puts doubt in jurors' minds, and it makes the system less able to appropriately and forcefully deal with people who are really being abused.
With folks that do make these false claims, I mean, it hurts everybody in the end. It ultimately,
everybody.
Yes, even the children.
Oh, absolutely. Their own children. I mean, you have to ask yourself this question, do I hate my husband more than I love my children? Because to accuse people falsely of abuse, you build a negative environment between her and that child and that person. And two loving parents, whether or not they get along with one another, is a very valuable thing to the children involved. And so it's a very destructive, detrimental, hurtful thing to do to your own kids.
Absolutely. Judge Lynn, you are the author of My Mother's Rules, a practical guide to becoming an emotional genius. And in one of the chapters, you quote your mom as saying, you never know what's really going on in somebody else's house unless you've lived there. Can you tell us briefly what she meant by this and why it's applicable when we're understanding the issue of domestic violence?
It's applicable to domestic violence because you often don't know. Women and men who are abused, but it's mostly women, make a point of not sharing what's going on. This is in the house, and when they come outside of the house, they do everything to protect that house, including lie about why they're sick, why they're hurt, why they can't do anything. And you can't assume just because someone gets to job every day or if she is rich and powerful out in the workplace or because she's upper middle class or whatever the case may be, that everything is okay at home. I can't believe that could be happening to her. It's amazing to whom these things happen. And so you cannot, when someone says ABC is going on in my house, you can't say, oh, it couldn't be because of the appearances of things. Because people try very, very hard to keep that kind of thing enclosed. So you don't know what's going on in somebody else's house unless you live there. So you have to listen to what people tell you. And because a lot of that goes unseen and actively hidden.
Absolutely. And I recommend for everyone to pick up Judge Lynn's book, My Mother's Rules. This is an excellent book to help encourage those of you that may be feeling a little bit weak emotionally and not just dealing with the issue of domestic violence, but other issues as well. Judge Lynn, you're also the co-author of Put It in Writing. Can you tell us briefly about that book?
Oh, Put It in Writing is simply a way to get people to started to having a conversation with family and friends when family and friends run up with economic problems. For instance, where you're going to loan money. Whenever I was on the bench and I said, it was a loan, the other guy says, no, it was a gift. I said, I guess nobody put anything on paper, and nobody ever did because people don't know how to start. What do you do? What do you say? We have those agreements in the book that allow you to do, it's a loan, let's just write it out so we don't get confused, or I have a grown child returning home, let's make sure we know what everybody wants to do and what the rules are, or if you're middle-aged or older and you and your siblings are caring for aging parents. It's agreement that comes out and it talks about all the things that need to be done for them and gives you an ability to assign everybody some duties so it doesn't fall on one person. So it's just like a sane approach to emotional issues, things that fracture families because there's misunderstanding and confusion. The agreements in there are designed to, if not eliminate, greatly diminish any confusion or hurt feelings in difficult situations.
And that's one thing that we're always working to do is try to help our own families eliminate those disagreements. That's excellent. Judge Lynn, how can folks reach you?
I blog every day on JudgeLynn.com. I have a Facebook page, Judge Lynn Toler of Divorce Court. I blog about issues from the mundane and the simple to real complex things. And people often ask me for advice there. And I don't give specific advice, but if you talk about a general subject matter and I believe at least I have a direction or thoughts or experience or speak to someone with experience in that, I will give you a general response about an idea or issue or a concern that people have.
Thank you, Judge Lynn Toler. We really appreciate you being with us and sharing with us your experience with the issue of domestic violence. Some really great, valuable information. I know we could have only received it by the opportunity to speak with someone just like yourself. So thank you so much for that.
Well, thank you, and good luck with Courage Network. I think it's a wonderful thing. I have looked at your site, and I really think it's a positive thing, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Judge Lynn. Again, Judge Lynn's site is www.judgelynn.com. I encourage all of you to visit Judge Lynn's site and learn more about her work as one of America's daytime courtroom judges for divorce court. For our listeners, thank you for joining us. This is Lynn Twyman with Courage Network. Our website is www.couragenetwork.com, where we're building courage by working together. Take care.